The valley. The first days of travel were wearying for both Ira and Shania. His 600 years had slowed down his pace a bit, though daily work in the gardens had kept him fit. Shania's life had been easy. Too easy. Yet she was an excellent horsewoman, and she surprised Adriel with her endurance. He set a fast pace, pushing relentlessly through the forest with only brief breaks for rest and food. They seldom conversed, each lost in his own grief. Ira unobtrusively tended Shania's needs until she at last gravely protested. "Ira, you are no longer a servant. My father declared your freedom. We are friends, that is all." "It is as a daughter I care for you," he replied, smiling. "I have no other kin." She hugged him impulsively. "And you are my spiritual father. We will care for each other." "And who will care for me?" Adriel asked, a hint of mischief flickering momentarily in his sad eyes. "We both will," Ira and Shania shouted in unison, their voices echoing strangely in the vast, quiet forest. And they laughed all at once, for the first time. They were bonded, the three of them. There where the mighty tree shut out all but thin fingers of sunlight which caressed, now and then, the clear colors of brilliant minerals and gemstones scattered upon the forest floor. One night, while Ira and Adriel sat before the fire discussing the direction of the next day's travel, Shania prepared for sleep in her small tent. She felt something hard in the bottom of the leather pouch that contained her supply of grooming aids. Pulling it out, she held it curiously in the faint firelight coming through the tent opening, and recognized it at once. It was a blue clay comb, one her father had made her mother years before. Ona had worn it only on the most special of occasions. A delicate spray of flowers was all that showed once the comb was inserted. Roses, daisies, tiny leaves, and a little vine that hung fragile and exquisite from the spray of flowers. The 3 daisies were centered with minute diamonds, which twinkled now in the firelight. She remembered all the times as a little girl when she had begged to wear it, and her mother had tucked it into her hair, cautioning her not to swing her head about, and leaving it in for only the briefest of moments. She'd understood in those far-off days that it symbolized the bittersweet love between her parents, and she had valued the trinket as highly as her mother did. Now, holding it here in the firelight, she knew a terrible longing for the two who had given her life. She ran her fingers over the smooth finish, imagining her father's sandy head bent above the demanding task, thinking only of Ona's joy in the gift. With a rush of tears, she saw her mother tucking the treasure into her daughter's pouch, pouring out the best she had, that Shania might know, some lonely night far from home, the measure of her love. Wrapping it carefully in the softest of her undergarments, she went to sleep holding it in her hand, strangely comforted. Each night they ate boiled grain that they had steamed all night over the coals of the fire, knelt upon the moist floor of the forest to pray, and then continued, trusting God and the map in Adriel's mind. They forded great rivers, rode days through the forest so deep and dark that they fell into grim, depressed silence, only to have the wilderness break at last into a mountain meadow, filled with sunlight and flowers, animals so tame that they frolicked about the travelers like lambs. "This must have been how it was in Eden," Shania said reverently as they lifted the burden from the horses and freed them to graze. When she had laid out some of the hard breads and the last of the raisins, Ira returned with a huge cupped leaf overflowing with crimson berries. "Well, a feast indeed," Adriel smiled as he cracked pecans big as a hen's egg and laid the tender meats alongside the raisin. "How appropriate, for I have a splendid announcement which calls for just such a celebration. As I followed this wild river upstream searching for food, I found that just beyond the bend in this meadow leads to another in which lies the entrance to Enoch's Valley. As you can see, there is no hint of it from here. One could travel through and never dream of its existence. If my calculations are correct, we have arrived. So let us rest and eat well. We will bathe and wash our travel-stained garments and present ourselves tomorrow to the holy citizens of Enoch's Valley. I am a bit afraid, Shania admitted reluctantly. Perhaps I am not holy enough. Nor I, Adriel said quietly. Let us pray we will bring no discord to this place that is a haven for the sons of God. The three of them knelt in the flower-strewn grass, thanking God for their safe journey, and asked for spiritual cleansings as they joined with Enoch and his converts. Around them a flock of birds, brilliant as gems, sang melodies that seemed to Shania almost human in their precise, sweet clarity. Next morning they made their way gently upward through the bright meadow in which they had slept, following along the river into yet another field of grass, flowers, and grazing deer. Ira and Shania, expecting to find the valley of which Adriel had spoken, looked at their leader questioningly. Adriel smiled at their confusion. Enoch planned wisely and well, my friends. Father told us when we rode out of the forest into the two meadows, connected by a bend in the untamed torrent of the river, that we had arrived. He said that in the second meadow, which would offer no obvious clue, there would be a wild grapevine growing upon a bitter cherry tree. At that point, one must push his way through a stand of brush and then into a narrow opening in a cliff. Yesterday I found the bitter cherry with the vine and the slot in the rock, but went no farther, wishing to share the moment of discovery with you who have borne with me the hardships of travel. He hesitated. I also needed the presence of your and comfort of your presence. I hope we find a welcome. They rode wordlessly past the gnarled tree with its profusion of vines hiding any sign of a path. Adriel dismounted and pulled aside an opening in the underbrush through which Shania and Ira rode carefully through, making every effort to leave no sign of their passing. A bit to their left, in a rocky cliff, appeared an opening so narrow that Shania had to speak sharply to urge Hadish through. Once on the other side, the three found themselves gazing at a place of incredible beauty. It wasn't like either Havilah or Eden, Shania thought, remembering the sprawling and fertile expanse. An enclosed paradise, it was a small world of its own. The few dwellings that dotted the encircling hillside blended so perfectly into their settings, one had to look carefully to be sure of their presence at all. Water leaped and foamed on a mountainside, shattering sunlight as it broke over rock and stone, to flow at last peacefully into a tiny lake shining from the valley floor. Crops and gardens grew in little terraces upon the hillside, and horses, cattle, and sheep grazed peacefully in the morning sun. You did well, Adriel. I often wondered if we could possibly find such a remote spot. Admiration warmed Ira's voice as he placed his hand upon the younger man's shoulder. Surely God was our guide, Adriel responded. They rode hesitantly toward a weathered structure, larger than the others, situated on a slight knoll, assuming it to be the dwelling of Enoch. A tall, dark-haired woman drew back, startled at their appearance in her dooryard, where she ground grain upon a round, hollowed stone. We are followers of the true God, fear not, Adriel said quickly, gently, noting the fear in her soft brown eyes. She stepped forward, then smiled, said, I am Ramona, wife of Enoch. Welcome. Forgive me if I did not greet you warmly. We live with a certain amount of apprehension, knowing that the evil one ever wills our destruction. We seek a home here. Would it be possible for us to speak to your husband? Adriel came directly to the point. So like him, Shania thought, smiling to herself. He will be in from the garden shortly for his noon meal. Please allow your horses to graze and find a spot in the shade while I bring something to refresh you. The woman hurried inside and returned with a jug of juice from which she served them. She smiled shyly at Shania as the dark liquid bubbled into her cup. Perhaps when your husband works in the field, you will bring your grain to grind, and we will speak of your journey. Shania blushed furiously, the rosy color tinging golden skin across high cheekbones. I am not Adriel's wife, but his niece. He is the younger brother of my father. We have traveled many miles, and it'll be a great treat indeed to speak with another woman. She felt her uncle's amused gaze upon her and blushed again. When Enoch arrived, they sat about an outdoor table overlooking the valley, and while they ate the simple food set before them, Adriel told the story of Havala's destruction, his stay with Nathan, and the subsequent journey. The patriarch's strong, angular face grew troubled at the story, and he spoke sadly at its close. Sep and Abigail were among the staunchest of God's people, and Havala was a stronghold of the Lord. I mourn its passing. You have done well in coming here. So far we have not been molested. Perhaps the evil ones have not discovered us, or perhaps they simply bide their time. It little matters, I suspect, except each day we're spared allows us time to give the warning to those who will heed it. But let us speak now of happier things. Enoch lifted his head and smiled. In the radiance warmed Shania like the comfort of her mother's arms in childhood. It cut through the grim sorrow she had lugged across the miles and miles of forest, and it kindled a flame of hope within her. Shania has left her betrothed, her parents, her life of ease and her prosperity to become God's child. She has accepted every hardship with patience and courage. I am proud to be her kinsman, Adriel said, turning toward her. Shania thought for a moment she would cry at the kindness in his words, but looking at Enoch, she carefully controlled her emotions. Thank you for welcoming us into this haven you have prepared. I am a most inexperienced follower of the great God of heaven, but I wish to be faithful and to walk in the footsteps of my grandmother Abigail. Enoch sobered and looked at her long and searchingly. Many have come here with that same desire, child. Only a few remain. It is more difficult for you who have grown up in the world outside. May God help you. All the warm anticipation drained from her, and a bleakness worse than death flooded her heart. As though he understood, Enoch said kindly, I will pray for you. He sat quietly then, thinking, as Ramona cleared away the remains of her meal. Finally, pointing toward an outcropping of rock jutting from the hillside above and beyond, he turned to Adriel. There is a cave above that outcropping that overlooks the valley. Because it faces south, it's warm and sunlit, a pleasant place. Since it was vacated only days ago by a man who chafed at our simple life here, I would suggest it as a comfortable home for Shania. His gaze shifted to Ira. I note your tender regard for the young woman. Set up your tent outside her dwelling, and before long you will have built a strong shelter. I trust her to your care, Adriel, son of Sep. Make your dwelling among my sons. I can use a man with the courage to set off into the wilderness with only God as his to lead. Perhaps you will travel with me now and again back to the cities to preach. I would be honored. Adriel's sad eyes responded to the invitation. Life means little to me anymore outside of my love for the promised one. I will never see my dear ones again. Oh, my brother, have you borne such a hopeless grief all these miles? Enoch scanned the man's haggard face in pity. Let me tell you the good news. The promised one will come, not once, but twice. The first time he will die for us. The second, he will return in glory as a mighty ruler, to raise his dead and take his people home. They sleep, your loved ones, in peace, as shall you and I, if we are faithful, until our blessed voice stirs our graves. And how do you know this? Ira asked quietly. It is a new message to us. Humbly and reverently Enoch explained, his voice strong with the same assurance they'd heard that day at the city. He showed me. He showed the great shining glory of his second appearing. I too was often troubled about the dead, and I pleaded with God for answers. Early one morning as I wrestled with these fears, he revealed his solution to sin, and I was satisfied that he is just, loving, and wise. We can trust him. Although he cannot tolerate evil, yet he loves us, and he will not leave us to the ultimate, inevitable results of human rebellion and sin. He will provide, through the promised one, an escape for all who desire it. It is hard to believe, but so magnetic is the pull of evil that only a few wish to remain and avail themselves of his rescue. But for those few, The joy is unsurpassed, for what he offers meets the deepest needs of our being in a way that even the pleasure of sin never can. Oh, that I could make that clear to those so intent upon destruction in the cities. It is though they only see my lips moving but hear nothing. Sometimes, when I am traveling from place to place, I begin to wonder if I am mad, for my message falls upon the listeners like so much foolishness. But then, finally riding home through the deep forest, I feel his presence, and sometimes his messengers travel alongside, encourage and instruct me. Then I know that the word of truth will always be foolishness to those cut off from him. I grieve for my fellow human beings, and I resolve to go back again and again, searching for those with humble, teachable hearts. You are a brave man. Your mission is a dangerous one. Shania heard the respect in old Ira's voice. Not so terribly, my friend. Were I wealthy, they would seize my possessions, but I only carry a message, which they neither see as dangerous nor desirable. At best, I glean only an occasional convert who often returns to them at a later date. This valley is yet too far from civilization to tempt them. But the day will come as mankind multiplies that we will all fear for our lives. They separated then, Enoch to return to his crops, the travelers to settle into their new homes. Shania looked about the cave and thought of her mother's horror could she see her daughter's final destination. Yet the young woman found it a welcome haven, a place to herself after weeks of traveling with inconvenience and lack of privacy. She broke off a long branch of an evergreen and swept away the debris of the former occupant. Ramona gave her armfuls of dried meadow grass to scatter upon the floor. She laid in one corner a luxurious fur rug her father had bound upon Hadesh that sad morning of the departure. There she would sleep. The cave angled back into the hillside in such a way she had total privacy in her sleeping area, and she felt a housewifely satisfaction as she settled her few belongings. On one of the narrow rock shelves that jutted naturally from the cave's interior, she placed the blue clay comb with its delicate flowers. Her mother had once promised she might wear it at her wedding. Now thoughts of Ben flooded her mind, and the cave and its surroundings suddenly seemed bleak as all the uncharted forests of the earth. She was trapped in this valley and could never find her way back alone. Ben was lost to her forever. A longing to fling herself upon the soft fur of her bed and weep threatened to overwhelm her. Tears streaming down her face, she turned toward an opening in the back of the cave. Following a narrow tunnel that angled sharply at one point, she came into a sunlit, grassy enclosure surrounded totally by rock walls. Through her tears, Shania gasped at its possibilities. Instantly, she knew why Enoch had given her the cave. Here in this hidden spot she would find the God of Adam and Abigail, this God who had cost her everything. Falling upon her knees, she let the sun soak into her weary, grieving body. Later she would talk to God. Now she would simply be still and heal, letting her posture assure him that her moment of regret was past, that she was his no matter the price. As she knelt, a wondrous peace filled her, and she sensed a love beyond that of human lovers, a divine love that left something more to be explored, a love that demanded but also fulfilled, a love that nurtured and never destroyed. She sensed that love was present in this valley in a marked way. Instead of being trapped, she had been freed. Love taught her all this in the quiet, sunny nook. Finally she slept, curled on the soft, warm grass until the sun lowered in the west and left her shivering. Later she brought Ira to see her discovery, and he said, "It is here we will plant Adam's daffodils." "You brought them?" Shania asked, wide-eyed and unbelieving. He nodded, pleased at her delight. "Of course, and many other seeds and bulbs. We will make this valley like the garden of the Lord." In the evening, when Shania and Ira sat in the front of the cave talking, Adriel scrambled up the hillside to join them. "Everyone has been warm and welcoming, but when darkness falls I need my old friends," he stated, seating himself cross-legged beside Ira. Moonlight glittered on something in his hands. And Shania teased lightly, "What gift is this that you bring us on your first visit?" "It is only my flute, and I bring you but this humble gift of music." "Did everyone at Havala play an instrument?" Shania asked. "Just about. Father was a real musician, and he insisted that all his sons know the basics. Perhaps Nathan and I enjoyed it more than some of the others. Sep taught Ben and me to play the flute during our long stints of herding. It was the first time he had spoken of loved ones left behind. And Shania felt somehow comforted to hear those familiar names once more. When Adriel lifted the flute to his lips, Shania was not surprised to hear the plaintive notes of the Song of Eve. For it was a song of Havala also. Its wistful message drifted over the darkening valley like a lonely cry, and to Shania it was the distilled sorrow of all mankind waiting, the healing of the promised one.